Welcome to Waiver Watch episode 39. This week's episode will cover two topics. As always, the weekly waiver totals. And number two, if not part 15, then what else? We're going to scratch the surface of part 15 and frequency bands. This is going to be a fun episode. Welcome back to this episode of Waiver Watch, episode 39 on August 16th?
16th.
August? 16th. I love it. I don't even know what day it is. August 16th, 2020. And let's just jump right into it. As always, Jakey, hit us with the weekly waiver totals.
All right. So we had 26 waivers this week, which I think is one less than last week. It's pretty consistent. And those are good numbers. It's better than the 13s. We did have a good week of 40 a little bit ago, but 26 is good. So 24 night waivers and 2 operations over human beings. And so nothing too exciting on the waiver front this week, just some kind of standard things.
Yep. Definitely a simple week. But the tidbits, the first bullet.
The waiver tidbits.
Yeah. What is so special about this week, though? However...
Yeah, I think, everything is bigger in Texas. Right?
Even the waiver count.
Yeah. So they took home 7 this week, which I don't think I've ever seen a state take home that many in a week. So 7 waivers to Texas. They're all night waivers. And then we had both 10739 alphas were ParaZero SafeAir Mavics. Mm-hmm. And the third tidbit, which is just kind of a head scratcher. So... BGE one of the night waiver companies that was approved this week, they got a waiver that superseded a previous night waiver from just over a month ago. And the provisions and the name and the address, everything about it is like exactly the same. So I'm not really sure why they got a new waiver. That's usually you see like a name change or maybe the date or something like that, but nothing changed. Very odd.
Interesting. So maybe just a mistake, right?
Yeah. Who knows?
All right. Well,
moving on.
Yeah, let's jump into the BB loss command and control, and really the topic for today's episode, which is a shift away from part 15 and part 5 for advanced operations. So about 4 episodes ago, we started picking up on some new provisions that were being added to waivers. And specifically, if you go to our blog, you can read the whole provision. However, to summarize it quickly, it's basically saying that you will no longer be able to use Part 15, Part 5 devices in controlled airspace to do BV loss flight. So this is a really key indicator that something, new discussions are being had, or maybe discussions are further along than they were in the past, that we need to really start thinking about what spectrum are we going to use for BV loss command and control. So this is really where this episode will start kicking off. So Jakey, I'll turn it over to you for a little bit for an introduction, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So maybe a quick, what's the problem with Part 15? We can kind of start there because Part 15 is ubiquitous among COTS drones. I mean, this is your 2.4 and 5.8 gigahertz that everybody uses, DJIs, Altels, you name it. 915 megahertz also falls in here, so everybody is using Part 15 almost. But there's some concerns there because Part 15 is kind of unlicensed, even though that's kind of a misunderstood term, and it has to accept interference. And Brent, that's probably something you're familiar with in a past life, right?
Yeah. So I guess in a past life, my first job out of college was an electromagnetic compatibility engineer. I was one of the guys and gals that was putting stamps in the back of equipment that are electronics, consumer electronics. So just like Underwriter's Laboratory, you may have seen a UL on the back of a device. I used to work for Intertech, which is ETL. So what we would do is we test consumer electronics, and specifically around Part 15, and also a CISPR regulation, which is a European regulation. But what I learned while I was there is that basically everything that's electronic that has some sort of processor in it does emit some electrical noise. And if they are emitting too much noise, it will have negative impacts on other electronics, i.e. maybe a drone, right? So do you remember back in the day when cell phones would go off and like over the intercom or radio, you would hear like noises? That is basically interference. Yep. So in a past life, was very much surrounded by electronics and saw, even a TV screen emits radio frequencies, even though it doesn't maybe it hasn't intended to receive, but you would never think that it would transmit. However, it does, so.
Yeah. Well, actually, I have an interesting story too that I think about it. Like many years back, this is kind of older drone tech at the time, but I remember operating, I think it was using 900 megahertz, but you'd have like FRS radios to talk to your VO or something. And I remember a scenario where we keyed an FRS radio close to the hand controller, and it actually did cause the drone to like do some weird movements, erratic movements and stuff like that. So, I mean, just all goes to show, like, Part 15 is great. It's really helped the UAS industry innovate and progress, but time to look at something a little more,
Part 15 is a phenomenal start. And for the future still is a very good solution. For all line of sight operation, clearly Part 15 has been working. So it's not a bad thing. And it will never go away. That's for sure. So
yeah, for sure.
But now so many people are chomping at the bit to go BVLOS. You have your drone delivery companies. And what's unique about these drone delivery companies, they've kind of already been pushing the direction that this should go. You have Zipline, Matternet, Flytrex. A lot of these companies are already using LTE modems, cell modems in their drone to navigate them. So it's a very logical progression, so this isn't coming out of nowhere. People are already using this stuff.
Yep. So the background kind of on what's next here is, so the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018 included a section 374, which required the FAA, along with a bunch of other stakeholders, to go look at UAS spectrum. Like what's out there, what should we be using? And there's some specific verbiage in that section, but there's two bands, C band and L band, and there's just some narrow slivers in there, kind of the 5 gigahertz and 1 gigahertz range, that have kind of already been allocated for UAS use, but they're not, you can't really license them yet. There's no FCC regulations to use them, so they're kind of hung up on some of that. But Congress wanted the FAA to look at those two bands specifically and kind of, technology, regulatory challenges, can we use them, can we not? But then if those aren't appropriate, they also directed them to kind of look at other things, like what else is there, And so this work has been going on, and finally the Wireless Teleco and Office of Engineering and Technology put out, looked for public comment on the matter. A docket went out right at the end of last year and closed early this year. And so we started reading some of these comments. I mean, these are big companies: Boeing, UPS, Verizon, T-Mobile. I mean, a bunch of big companies that all have stake in this, put their comments in. And so we dug in and kind of read through a bunch, and we just picked out kind of 3 themes that are pretty consistent through all of them that we're just going to, kind of scratch the surface of it, like you said, Brent.
Yeah.
So Brent, why don't you kick us off with the first theme here on commercial wireless spectrum?
This section basically comes from the comments that we pulled from the researchers at Northeastern University in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. They performed some research basically to see what would happen when you'd fly drones up at a certain altitude and how many cell networks or cell towers could you connect to. And they found something interesting that may not be such a surprise, but it turns out that a drone flying at altitude has the potential to connect to more towers than a drone on the ground, or i.e. a cell phone in a person's pocket. So the original cell network wasn't designed for this type of connection because they weren't anticipating people climbing to the tops of the trees to make phone calls. Maybe you do that out out in the wilderness, but
Right.
this presents a different problem. You're going to have a lot more opportunities for a device to connect to many more towers, which, I'm not a cell expert, but, there'll probably be some more switching algorithms that will need to be developed in order to handle this extra load. They also refer to this as interference. You're having so many signals trying to connect, or a single signal trying to connect to many nodes, that you have to deal with this somehow. You have to say no to all these connections and only say yes to one, and which one do you do that? How do you pick the correct tower to connect to? Also, because of where UAS are operating, it just doesn't fit the normal current cell network, which is designed to be utilized from the ground through personal cell phone devices. So a whole bunch of things will have to change here as the UAS industry grows, and if C-band is going to be used, the cell network will have to adapt to connect to that. Jakey,
Yep.
Any more comments on that, or kick it over to the next topic?
Yeah. I think this one is important, because it's there's almost unanimous support for it. I think across all the commenters, like even AOPA, which traditionally is like against everything UAS and so on. They actually even suggested as well, hey, FAA, you should look at cellular technology for drones. So I think one of the biggest messages about it too is that it's already licensed appropriately. And so really it just comes down to technical challenges. And these telcos are very good at that. There's funding and incentives to do that. So they can innovate very rapidly and make this work without having to kind of work through the regulatory challenges associated with some of these other things. So it's just, again, like unanimous support for it. So I think that's the only other thing I'd add there.
Perfect. Jumping over to C-band and L-band, how should they be utilized, and what are some key things that we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, so these are two bands that, like I mentioned previously, have kind of already been allocated to UAS use potentially. C-band is 5030 to 5091 megahertz. And so there's generally, again, pretty widespread support for this, but many of the commenters kind of recognize challenges at low altitudes. 5030 megahertz is pretty high frequency, so it has challenges with multipathing and penetration, which you experience at low altitudes. And so there a little hesitancy maybe on the low altitude, but I think from a high altitude standpoint, it's very viable, and most people agree. The one, I think, caveat with C-band that a lot of commenters agree on as well is that they want to see it kind of flexibly licensed, kind of like the cell network in a way. It's, don't restrict it to just a certain very specific kind of use. Give it some flexibility for, again, these companies to kind of innovate and use in the best possible way. So yeah, and then we'll cover L-band quick here, really quick. So L-band, there's some issues on L-band. A lot of commenters agree that whatever frequencies are used, C-band, L-band, cell, whatever it is, it has to not interfere with aviation spectrum, kind of the current existing users of it. So in the L-band, there is DME, it's a navigational aid used by pilots. There's ADS-B. There is part of the GPS band actually sits like right next to this L-band that they're proposing. So a lot of concerns on UAS operations interfering with a lot of these different critical manned aviation, spectrum needs. So don't interfere with the guys that are already using it is a common theme.
Right. Also, too, it was already a key indicator that L-band wasn't going to be a solution from the start. Based on the provisions that we see in our current waivers, there's always a provision at the bottom, towards the bottom, that says, you must not equip ADS-B out on your UAS. So this is because you don't want to start interfering, exactly what you're saying. You don't want to interfere with manned aviation. It's important for manned aviation to have ADS-B. And if the hundreds of thousands of UAS that operate every day are pumping out ADS-B, it's going to make it very noisy for people to even figure out what's a manned and what's unmanned. Because a lot of the times, just like we go out and we fly every day, we have no incursions with manned aircraft. It's because we're at a low altitude. It's just unnecessary noise for a pilot to know at all times. This is like, this is a loaded, pilots should know, but in the current situation, the system is not equipped to handle 100,000 more drones being added to ADS-B out at this point. Yep. So it's not a good solution. And FAA, FCC, everyone has identified this already. So, yeah. So that was a pretty heavy episode. We didn't go too deep into it. There's so much more behind Part 15, C-band, all of this for the future. But this is something that everyone should be paying attention to. And, maybe the number one thing to grab out of this episode is that there is going to be a transition to what type of frequency should we use for BV loss, because it will need to be robust, open, secure, all of these things, right?
Yeah. Yep. It's one of the big elephants along with the AA. There's the aircraft are there, but there has to be kind of secure, like you said, secure, reliable systems in place to make sure these operations are safe. So
absolutely. So that does it for this week's episode of Waiver Watch, episode 39. If not part 15, then what? So as always, stay tuned for next week's. Take care.
Fly safe.